The morning started like any other Tuesday at Clarence House. James Mitchell had been working as a royal guard for nearly 15 years, and he thought he had seen everything there was to see within the palace walls. His duties were clear and routine. Check the security of the royal chambers, ensure all windows were locked, and verify that no unauthorized personnel had access to the private quarters. That particular morning, James was assigned to the upper floor where Queen Camilla's personal chambers were located. The Queen was away on official business in Scotland, attending a charity event that would keep her occupied for 3 days. This meant the staff had a rare opportunity to perform deep cleaning and maintenance work that was otherwise difficult to schedule. As James walked through the corridor, his boots making soft thuds against the carpeted floor, he noticed Sarah, one of the senior housekeepers, struggling with a large closet door. The woman looked flustered, her usually neat hair coming loose from its bun. "Everything all right, Sarah?" James asked, stepping closer. Sarah turned to him with worried eyes. "This door has been stuck for weeks. The Queen mentioned it last month, but with everything going on, maintenance hasn't gotten around to fixing it. Since she's away, I thought I'd try to sort it out myself." James nodded and moved to help. He was a tall man with strong shoulders, and forcing open a stubborn door was well within his capabilities. He gripped the ornate handle and pulled with steady pressure. The door resisted at first, creaking in protest, but then suddenly gave way with a loud crack that echoed through the empty chamber. Both James and Sarah stumbled backward slightly from the sudden release. As they regained their balance, they peered into the closet. It was deeper than expected, with rows of clothing hanging in protective covers. The smell of lavender and cedarwood wafted out, the scent used to preserve fine fabrics. Sarah stepped inside first, pulling a small flashlight from her apron pocket. The closet had overhead lighting, but some bulbs had burned out, leaving shadows in the corners. As she swept the light across the space, something caught James's attention. At the very back of the closet, behind layers of formal gowns and coats, there was a garment bag different from all the others. While most of the bags were modern, cream-colored canvas with the royal household insignia, this one was older, made of a heavy ivory silk that had yellowed slightly with age. It hung separately as if deliberately kept apart from the other clothes. "What's that?" James pointed to the unusual bag. Sarah followed his gaze and frowned. "I've never seen that before. I've been working in this household for 8 years, and I've organized this closet dozens of times." Curiosity got the better of them both. Sarah carefully made her way past the hanging clothes, with James following close behind. The closet was surprisingly spacious, almost like a small room itself. When they reached the mysterious garment bag, they could see it was secured with an old-fashioned zipper and tied at the top with a silk ribbon that had faded from what was probably once a deep purple to a pale lavender. Sarah hesitated, her hand hovering over the zipper. "Should we open it?" James considered for a moment. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were palace staff performing their duties. If there was something in the Queen's closet, it was better they knew about it, especially from a security perspective. "We should at least check what it is," he said. "It could be something that needs proper storage or conservation." With careful fingers, Sarah untied the ribbon and slowly pulled down the zipper. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet closet. As the bag opened, both of them gasped audibly. Inside was a gown unlike anything James had ever seen outside of history books and museums. The fabric shimmered even in the dim light, a rich combination of gold and silver threads woven into the most delicate silk. The embroidery was extraordinary, intricate patterns of flowers and symbols that he recognized as having royal significance. Pearls and what appeared to be precious stones were sewn into the bodice, and the craftsmanship was clearly the work of master artisans. "This can't be what I think it is," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. James leaned closer, his trained eye taking in every detail. He had studied royal history as part of his training, and he had seen photographs of this gown before. The distinctive design, the particular shade of the silk, the pattern of the embroidery, all of it pointed to one unmistakable conclusion. "Sarah," he said slowly, his heart beating faster, "I think this is Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown." The housekeeper's face went pale. "That's impossible. The coronation gown is kept in the royal collection. It's supposed to be in a climate-controlled facility with round-the-clock security. It's a national treasure." James pulled out his phone and quickly searched for images of the late Queen's coronation. When the pictures loaded, he held the screen next to the gown. The match was undeniable. Every detail corresponded, from the pattern of the embroidery to the placement of the jewels. "It's the same gown," he confirmed, his voice tight with the weight of the discovery. They both stood in stunned silence, staring at the dress that had been worn during one of the most important ceremonies in British history. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth had been watched by millions around the world. This gown had been photographed countless times, analyzed by fashion historians, and considered one of the most iconic royal garments ever created. But what was it doing here? Hidden in the back of Queen Camilla's closet? How had it ended up in Clarence House instead of in the secure royal collection where it belonged? And most importantly, did Queen Camilla know it was there? James's mind raced through the possibilities, each more confusing than the last. This wasn't just any piece of clothing. This was a piece of history, a symbol of the monarchy itself. Its presence here, apparently forgotten or deliberately hidden, raised questions that he wasn't sure he wanted to answer. Sarah carefully zipped the garment bag back up, her hands shaking slightly. "We need to report this," she said. "But to whom? If we go to the wrong person, it could cause a scandal." James nodded grimly. He understood her concern. In the world of royal service, discretion was everything, but this discovery was too significant to keep quiet. Someone needed to know that Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown had been found in an unexpected place. And someone needed to explain how it had gotten there. As they stepped out of the closet, James took one last look at the silk garment bag hanging in the shadows. Whatever the explanation turned out to be, he knew that this morning had just become far more complicated than a simple stuck door. This discovery would set off a chain of events that neither he nor Sarah could have possibly anticipated. James and Sarah stood in the hallway outside Queen Camilla's chambers, both trying to process what they had just discovered. The ornate clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each second of their indecision. James had his phone in his hand, thumb hovering over the contacts list, but he couldn't decide who to call first. "We could call the household manager," Sarah suggested, wringing her hands nervously. "Mrs. Patterson has been with the family for decades. She would know the proper protocol." James shook his head. "Mrs. Patterson is in London today for a meeting. She won't be back until tomorrow evening." He scrolled through his contacts, thinking, what about the security coordinator? "Mr. Barnes?" Sarah's eyes widened. "He'll think we're making it up. You know how he is about wild stories." She had a point. Richard Barnes was notorious for his skepticism and his strict adherence to procedure. If they called him with a story about finding the late Queen's coronation gown in a closet, he would likely dismiss it as confusion or attention-seeking. They needed someone who would take them seriously and handle the situation with the sensitivity it required. Finally, James's eyes landed on a name in his contacts, Victoria Chen, the assistant private secretary to Queen Camilla. Victoria was young, only 32, but she had earned her position through intelligence and discretion. More importantly, she was currently at Clarence House working in her office on the ground floor. "Victoria," James said decisively. "She's here now, she has direct access to the Queen, and she's level-headed enough to know what to do." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Yes, that's good. Call her." James pressed the number and held the phone to his ear. It rang 3 times before Victoria's crisp, professional voice answered. "Victoria Chen speaking." "Ms. Chen, this is James Mitchell from security. I'm currently on the upper floor with Sarah from housekeeping. We need you to come up here immediately. It's extremely urgent." There was a brief pause. Victoria was used to handling urgent matters, but something in James's tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation. "Is there a security threat?" "No, nothing like that. But please come quickly. And please come alone. I'll be there in 2 minutes." True to her word, Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs exactly 2 minutes later, slightly breathless from climbing quickly. She was dressed in her usual professional attire, a navy blue suit with her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her expression was calm but curious. "James, Sarah, what's going on?" she asked, looking between them. James glanced down the corridor to ensure they were alone. "We found something in Queen Camilla's closet. Something that shouldn't be there, or at least we don't think it should be there." Victoria's eyebrows rose. "What kind of something?" "It's better if we show you," Sarah said quietly. They led Victoria into the Queen's chambers. The room was elegant and comfortable, decorated in warm creams and soft greens with family photographs on the side tables and fresh flowers by the window. It felt more like a home than a palace, which was exactly what Queen Camilla had intended. They walked to the large closet, and James pulled open the door that had been stuck just an hour earlier. Victoria followed them inside, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. When they reached the back of the closet and Sarah pointed to the silk garment bag, Victoria's professional composure faltered for just a moment. "What's in the bag?" she asked. Sarah carefully unzipped it again, revealing the spectacular gown inside. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes widening as she took in the details. She reached out as if to touch it, then pulled her hand back as if afraid the gown might disappear. "Is this what I think it is?" she whispered. "We believe it's Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown," James confirmed. "We've checked photos and everything matches." Victoria was silent for a long moment, her mind clearly racing. She pulled out her own phone and began taking careful photographs of the gown, making sure to capture every angle without touching the fabric. Her hands were steady, but James could see the tension in her shoulders. "Does anyone else know about this?" Victoria asked, still photographing. "Just the three of us," Sarah assured her. "Good. We need to keep it that way for now." Victoria finished taking photos and stepped back from the garment bag. "Sarah, please close and zip the bag carefully. James, I need you to lock this closet and make sure no one enters these chambers without my direct authorization." Both James and Sarah nodded and followed her instructions. Once the closet was secured and they were back in the hallway, Victoria led them to a small sitting room used by staff members. She closed the door and turned to face them. "I need to tell you both that this situation is more delicate than you might realize," Victoria began, choosing her words carefully. "The coronation gown is indeed supposed to be in the royal collection at Windsor. If this is the genuine article, and I have no reason to doubt it based on what I've seen, then there are only a few possible explanations for how it ended up here." "Like what?" James asked. Victoria sat down on one of the chairs and gestured for them to do the same. "The late Queen might have requested that it be brought here before she passed away. Queen Camilla might have been given custody of it for preservation or display purposes, or—" She paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. "There might have been some kind of administrative error or miscommunication within the royal household." Sarah leaned forward. "What should we do?" "I need to contact the master of the royal household and the keeper of the royal collection," Victoria said. "They'll need to verify whether the gown in the official collection is genuine or if there's been a substitution. In the meantime, this room and that closet are off limits to everyone except essential personnel." "Do you think Queen Camilla knows it's there?" James asked the question that had been bothering him since they first opened the garment bag. Victoria considered carefully before answering. "I honestly don't know. Her Majesty has many items in her personal wardrobe, some of which were gifts or inheritances from the late Queen. It's possible she's never looked in the back of that closet, or that she was told it was a replica. We simply don't have enough information yet." She stood up and straightened her jacket. "What I do know is that this discovery needs to be handled with absolute discretion. The media would have a field day with this story if it leaked. Questions would be raised about the security of royal treasures, about relationships between the late Queen and Queen Camilla, about all sorts of things that don't need to be speculated about publicly." James and Sarah exchanged glances. They both understood the implications. The British press could turn even the most innocent situation into a scandal with the right headline. "We won't say anything to anyone," Sarah promised. "I know you won't," Victoria said, her tone warm but firm. "You've both shown excellent judgment by bringing this to me immediately. Now I need you to go about your normal duties as if nothing has happened. Can you do that?" They both nodded. As they left the sitting room, James felt a strange mixture of excitement and anxiety. They had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something that could potentially rewrite the recent history of the royal family. But they had also become part of a secret that could have far-reaching consequences if not handled properly. Victoria watched them go, then pulled out her phone again. She had several very difficult calls to make, and she wasn't looking forward to any of them. But first she needed to document everything properly and make sure the gown was secure, whatever the explanation for its presence in Queen Camilla's closet. The truth would need to come out eventually. As she walked back toward the Queen's chambers, Victoria couldn't help but wonder what other secrets might be hidden in the palace's many closets and storage rooms. The monarchy had endured for over 1,000 years, and in that time countless objects had been moved, stored, forgotten, and rediscovered. This coronation gown was just one piece in an enormous puzzle of history and tradition, but it was a very important piece, and Victoria knew that solving this particular puzzle would require all of her skill, discretion, and diplomatic ability. 2 hours after James and Sarah made their discovery, Victoria Chen sat in a private meeting room with 3 other people who had been sworn to absolute secrecy. The atmosphere was tense and everyone spoke in hushed tones despite the room being soundproof. Across from Victoria sat Edward Thornberry, the keeper of the royal collection, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. Next to him was Margaret Sullivan, head of textile conservation for the royal household, a woman whose expertise in historic fabrics was unmatched in Britain. The third person was David Wu, the deputy head of palace security, who had been brought in to assess any potential security implications. Victoria had spread several printed photographs of the discovered gown across the table. Margaret was examining them with a magnifying glass, her face intense with concentration. Edward had his laptop open, comparing the photos to the official records and images of Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown. "The embroidery pattern matches exactly," Margaret said, setting down her magnifying glass. "See this section here where the rose and thistle motifs intersect? That's a very specific design element that was unique to the coronation gown. It's not something that would be replicated in any copy or inspired design." Edward nodded slowly, his expression troubled. "I've been reviewing our records. According to the database, Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown is currently stored in the Royal Collection Vault at Windsor Castle. It was last physically inspected 8 months ago during a routine conservation check." "Who conducted that inspection?" David asked, making notes on his tablet. "2 of our senior conservators, both of whom have been with us for over 20 years, Edward replied. "Neither of them reported any concerns or irregularities." Victoria leaned forward. "So either the gown at Windsor is a replica and the real one is at Clarence House, or we somehow have 2 versions of the same gown." "Is that possible?" Margaret shook her head firmly. "Not likely. The coronation gown was a one-of-a-kind creation. The level of craftsmanship, the materials used, the specific jewels and pearls sewn into it, these things aren't easily duplicated. Even creating a high-quality replica would take months of work by expert artisans, and such a project would be documented and approved at the highest levels." "What about before the late Queen passed away?" Victoria suggested. "Could she have commissioned a replica for some reason?" Edward consulted his records again. There's no documentation of any such commission, and the Queen was quite particular about maintaining accurate records of all royal regalia and historic garments. David Wu had been quiet, listening carefully to the discussion. Now he spoke up, his voice measured and thoughtful. "I think we need to consider a possibility that no one wants to acknowledge. What if the gown was moved from Windsor to Clarence House without proper documentation, perhaps as a personal request from the late Queen to Queen Camilla?" The room fell silent. It was a sensitive suggestion, implying that proper protocols might not have been followed during the transition after Queen Elizabeth's death. Victoria chose her words carefully. The late Queen and Queen Camilla had a close relationship, especially in the final years. It's not impossible that Queen Elizabeth might have wanted Camilla to have certain items, including this gown, perhaps as a symbol of continuity or as a personal gesture. "But why would it be hidden in the back of a closet?" Margaret asked. "If it was a gift or a transfer of custody, surely it would be properly stored and displayed, or at least kept in better conditions." Edward closed his laptop and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "There's only one way to resolve this conclusively. We need to physically examine both gowns, the one at Windsor and the one at Clarence House. We need to determine which one, if either, is the original coronation gown." "That's going to require access to the Queen's private chambers," David pointed out, "and potentially opening a vault at Windsor that requires multiple levels of authorization." Victoria nodded. "I understand, but we can't move forward without confirming what we're dealing with. I propose that we conduct the examination here first, since we already have access." "Margaret, how soon can you do a detailed analysis of the Clarence House gown?" "I can do it today if necessary," Margaret replied. "I'll need to bring some equipment and one assistant, someone I trust completely. The analysis will take several hours, but I should be able to determine the age of the fabric, verify the construction techniques, and assess whether it matches the documented specifications of the original. Do it, Victoria decided. Edward, can you arrange for a similar examination of the Windsor gown without raising alarms? Perhaps frame it as a routine conservation check? Edward thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I can do that. I'll conduct the inspection myself with one other senior conservator. If anyone asks, we're simply following up on some documentation updates. Good, Victoria said. David, I need you to review all security logs and access records for both locations. If the gown was moved, there should be some record of transport or personnel movement even if the specific contents weren't documented. David made a note on his tablet. I'll start with the period immediately before and after the late Queen's passing. That's the most likely time frame for any transfer. As the meeting broke up and everyone prepared to begin their tasks, Margaret approached Victoria privately. The conservation expert had a concerned expression on her face. Victoria, there's something I need to mention, Margaret said quietly. If this gown at Clarence House is the original, and it's been stored in that closet for months or possibly years, it could have sustained damage. Historic textiles are extremely fragile, and they require very specific storage conditions, temperature control, humidity levels, protection from light and pests. Victoria's heart sank. How bad could it be? I won't know until I examine it properly, but every day it remains in suboptimal conditions increases the risk of deterioration. Some damage might be reversible with conservation work, but some might be permanent. This gown is over 70 years old. It's irreplaceable. Then we need to move quickly, Victoria said. Do whatever you need to do to assess and protect it. Margaret nodded and left to gather her equipment. Victoria remained in the meeting room for a moment, looking at the photographs spread across the table. The gown in the images was breathtakingly beautiful, a masterpiece of design and craftsmanship. The thought that it might be slowly deteriorating in a closet was almost painful. But beyond the conservation concerns, Victoria was troubled by a deeper question. How had such an important artifact ended up misplaced or hidden? The royal household prided itself on meticulous record-keeping and careful stewardship of historic items. For something as significant as Queen, Elizabeth's coronation gown to be in the wrong place suggested either a serious administrative failure or a deliberate choice that had never been properly documented. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Queen Camillas' personal assistant, reminding her that the Queen would be returning from Scotland the following afternoon and would need briefings on everything that had occurred during her absence. Victoria stared at the message for a long moment. How was she going to explain this situation to Queen Camilla? Would the Queen already know about the gown's presence in her closet, or would this be a complete surprise to her as well? There were too many questions and not enough answers. But Victoria knew one thing for certain. Within the next 24 hours, they would need to have a much clearer understanding of what had happened. And then someone would need to have a very delicate conversation with Queen Camilla about what had been found in her closet. Victoria gathered the photographs and locked them in a secure folder. She had a long day ahead of her, and it would require all of her diplomatic skills to navigate the situation without causing embarrassment to anyone involved. The monarchy thrived on tradition and dignity, and this situation had the potential to undermine both if not handled with extreme care. As she left the meeting room, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that they were only seeing the surface of something much deeper. The coronation gown was just the beginning. What other secrets might be revealed as they investigated its mysterious presence at Clarence House? And would the truth, when finally uncovered, be something the royal family wanted the world to know? Margaret Sullivan arrived at Clarence House 3 hours later with her assistant, a quiet young woman named Elena, who specialized in historic textiles. They brought with them several cases of equipment, microscopes, ultraviolet lights, pH testing materials, fiber analysis tools, and carefully calibrated instruments for measuring fabric deterioration. James had been assigned to stand guard outside Queen Camilla's chambers while the examination took place. He watched as Margaret and Elena unpacked their equipment with the precision of surgeons preparing for a delicate operation. Victoria was also present, observing from a respectful distance and ready to assist if needed. Margaret approached the garment bag with reverence, as if she were about to handle a religious artifact. In many ways she was. The coronation gown represented not just fashion history but the continuity of the British monarchy itself. "We'll need to move it to better light," Margaret said, looking around the closet. "Is there a clean, flat surface nearby where we can lay it out?" Victoria led them to the Queen's dressing room, where there was a large table usually used for laying out formal attire. They had covered it with clean white cotton sheets, creating a sterile workspace. Elena carefully carried the garment bag while Margaret supported it from beneath, and together they transported it like a precious patient. Once on the table, Margaret slowly opened the bag completely and began to ease the gown out. Even in its aged state, the coronation dress was magnificent. The ivory silk glowed in the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and the gold and silver embroidery caught the sun, creating tiny sparkles across the fabric. "First impressions," Margaret said, speaking into a small recording device she kept in her pocket for documentation purposes. "The gown appears to be in remarkably good condition despite improper storage. No visible insect damage, no major tears or stains. Some slight discoloration on the train, possibly from contact with the closet floor or other garments." Elena was photographing every detail, creating a comprehensive visual record. She took close-up shots of the embroidery, the seams, the jewels, and the overall construction. Each photograph was time-stamped and labeled. Margaret pulled on a pair of white cotton gloves and began her physical examination. She started with the fabric itself, gently feeling the weight and texture of the silk. Her experienced fingers could detect things that eyes alone might miss. "The silk is genuine mid-20th century production," she murmured. "The weight and weave are consistent with luxury fabrics from that era. Modern reproductions feel different, even high-quality ones. This is authentic period material." She moved to the embroidery, examining it under a magnifying glass. The threadwork was extraordinarily fine, the kind of craftsmanship that took hundreds of hours to complete. Each tiny stitch had been placed with precision, creating elaborate patterns that told stories of British heritage: roses for England, thistles for Scotland, shamrocks for Ireland, daffodils for Wales. The embroidery technique is hand-done using methods that were common in the 1950s, Margaret continued her documentation. Machine embroidery from that era looks different under magnification. This is absolutely handwork, and at an exceptional level of skill. Elena had set up the ultraviolet light, which could reveal repairs, stains, or fabric composition that weren't visible in normal light. When Margaret switched it on and directed it at the gown, certain areas glowed slightly different colors, revealing the complex layers of construction. "This confirms the age," Margaret said with growing certainty. "The fabric fluoresces in a way that's consistent with textiles from the 1950s. Modern fabrics, even those designed to look vintage, react differently under UV light." Victoria watched the examination with growing tension. Everything Margaret was finding pointed to the same conclusion. This was not a replica or a reproduction. This was an authentic gown from the coronation era. Margaret moved to examine the jewels and pearls sewn into the bodice. She used a special loupe, a jeweler's magnifying glass, to inspect each stone carefully. Some were diamonds, others were semi-precious stones, all set in tiny gold mounts and stitched into the fabric. "The stones are consistent with what was documented in the original coronation gown specifications," Margaret said. "Small diamonds, sapphires, and rubies, all cut in styles popular in the early 1950s. The pearls are natural, not cultured, which was standard for royal garments of that period." She took several small samples, just tiny threads and nearly invisible fragments of fabric, which she placed in labeled containers for laboratory analysis. These samples would provide definitive information about the age and composition of the materials. After 2 hours of meticulous examination, Margaret finally stepped back and removed her gloves. Elena switched off the UV light and began packing up their equipment. Victoria had been watching the entire process, afraid to interrupt but desperate to know the conclusion. "Well?" Victoria asked when Margaret remained silent. Margaret looked at her with serious eyes. "Based on everything I've examined, the materials, the construction techniques, the embroidery, the jewels, the age of the fabric, I believe this is the original coronation gown worn by Queen Elizabeth during her coronation ceremony. It's not a replica or a copy. This is the real thing." Victoria felt her stomach drop. "You're certain?" "I'm as certain as I can be without laboratory confirmation of the samples, but that's just a formality at this point. Everything about this gown screams authenticity. The level of craftsmanship, the materials used, The construction methods, these aren't things that would be replicated for a display piece or a costume. Then what's at Windsor? Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer was going to complicate everything. That's what we need to find out, Margaret replied. Edward should be conducting his examination right now. We should have his report within the hour. They carefully returned the gown to its protective bag, though Margaret insisted on leaving it in the dressing room rather than back in the closet. She had already drafted a list of immediate conservation needs. The gown needed to be stored at a specific temperature and humidity level. It needed to be supported properly to prevent strain on the fabric. And it needed to be protected from light and dust. Victoria's phone rang, and she saw it was Edward calling from Windsor. She stepped into the hallway to take the call, her heart pounding. Victoria. Edward's voice was grave. We've completed our examination of the gown in the Royal Collection Vault. And? There was a long pause. It's a replica, a very good one, made with attention to detail and quality materials, but definitely not the original. The fabric is too new. The embroidery is machine-done despite being made to look like handwork. And the jewels are cubic zirconia rather than real stones. Victoria closed her eyes, processing this information. How long has the replica been there? That's the thing, Edward said, his voice strained. According to our records, this gown was placed in the vault 18 months ago, shortly after the late Queen's death. Before that, the coronation gown was supposedly on loan to a museum exhibition, but the paperwork is vague about which museum and when it was returned. So somewhere in that transition, the real gown was replaced with a replica and no one noticed. It appears that way. The switch was clever. The replica is good enough that in low light conditions or in photographs it would pass inspection. It's only under close physical examination that the differences become apparent. Victoria rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. This means that the real coronation gown has been sitting in Queen Camilla's closet, probably since around the time of Queen Elizabeth's death, while a fake has been in the official royal collection. That's correct, Edward confirmed. The question now is, how did this happen and who authorized it? I think I might know, Victoria said slowly, a theory forming in her mind. But I need to speak with Queen Camilla before we go any further. She's returning tomorrow afternoon. Can you keep this quiet until then? Of course, Edward agreed. But Victoria, this is serious. If word gets out that we've had a fake in the royal collection for over a year, the embarrassment to the institution would be immense. People trust us to safeguard these historic items. I know, Victoria said, which is why we need to handle this very carefully and get the full story before we decide what to do next. After ending the call, Victoria stood in the quiet hallway, her mind racing through possibilities. The most logical explanation was that Queen Elizabeth had moved the gown herself, perhaps giving it to Camilla as a gesture of trust and continuity. But why would she replace it with a replica instead of properly documenting the transfer? And why would Camilla, if she knew she had the real gown, keep it hidden in the back of her closet? There were pieces of this puzzle still missing, and Victoria suspected that only Queen Camilla herself could provide them. The conversation they would need to have tomorrow was going to be one of the most difficult and delicate of Victoria's career. But it was necessary. The truth, whatever it turned out to be, had to come out. Queen Camilla arrived back at Clarence House on Wednesday afternoon, looking relaxed and pleased with her visit to Scotland. The charity event had been successful, and she was in good spirits as she walked through the entrance, greeted by staff members who welcomed her home. Victoria Chen had been waiting in her office, rehearsing in her mind how to approach the sensitive topic. She had spent the previous evening reviewing every piece of information they had gathered, trying to anticipate every possible explanation and outcome. Now, as she received word that the Queen was back and settling in, Victoria's nervousness increased. She gave Queen Camilla an hour to refresh and change after her journey, then requested a private meeting. The Queen agreed immediately, asking Victoria to join her in the small sitting room she used for informal discussions. When Victoria entered, Queen Camilla was seated in her favorite chair by the window, a cup of tea on the table beside her. She looked up and smiled warmly, gesturing for Victoria to sit across from her. Victoria, it's good to see you. I hope everything went smoothly while I was away. Victoria sat down, her folder of documentation clutched in her hands. Your Majesty, something unexpected occurred yesterday that requires your attention. It's rather delicate, and I wanted to speak with you privately about it before involving anyone else. The Queen's expression shifted from friendly to concerned. She set down her teacup and gave Victoria her full attention. That sounds serious. Please tell me what happened. Victoria took a breath and began. Yesterday morning, one of our housekeepers was working in your chambers with a security guard. They were fixing a stuck closet door, and in the process they discovered a garment bag in the back of the closet. Inside that bag was what appears to be Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown. Queen Camilla's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like relief. She was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. I see, she finally said, her voice soft. So it's been found. Victoria felt her heart race. Your Majesty, did you know the gown was there? Queen Camilla nodded slowly. Yes, I knew. Though I'll admit, I had almost forgotten about it over these past months. There's been so much to deal with, so many changes and adjustments. The gown became one of those things I meant to address but kept postponing. Can you tell me how it came to be in your closet? Victoria asked gently. The Queen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of memory and emotion. It was about 3 months before Elizabeth passed away. She called me to Windsor for a private visit, just the two of us. I knew something was weighing on her mind because she had that look she got when she was preparing to discuss something important. Queen Camilla turned back to face Victoria. We had tea in her private sitting room, and she told me she had been thinking about her coronation, about that day 70 years ago when she became queen. She said the gown had become a symbol of duty and responsibility, but also of hope and new beginnings. Victoria listened intently, not wanting to interrupt. Elizabeth told me that she wanted me to have the gown, Queen Camilla continued, not as a public gesture, but as a private one between the two of us. She said that when she was gone, I would carry forward the role of queen consort, and she wanted me to have something that represented the weight and the beauty of that responsibility. So she gave you the original gown? Victoria asked. She arranged for it to be brought to Clarence House herself, Queen Camilla confirmed. She was very specific that this should be done quietly, without fuss or ceremony. She didn't want it to become a media story or for people to read too much into it. It was simply meant to be a gesture of confidence and continuity between us. And the replica at Windsor? Queen Camilla sat back down looking tired. Elizabeth had commissioned it months earlier, knowing that the public and the royal collection would expect the coronation gown to remain in the official holdings. She was very practical about such things. The replica was made by some of the finest artisans in the country, people she trusted to do the work discreetly. It was meant to serve as the display piece while I would have the original as a personal trust. Victoria was beginning to understand, but questions remained. Why was it kept in the back of your closet, Your Majesty? Why not properly displayed or stored? Queen Camilla's expression became pained. After Elizabeth died, I went through such a difficult period. Grief, adjustment to the new role, the constant public scrutiny. When the gown was delivered here, I had it placed in my closet temporarily, thinking I would find a proper place for it later, perhaps a special display case or a secure storage area. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But then time passed, and every time I thought about dealing with it, I felt overwhelmed. It represented so much, not just Elizabeth's trust in me, but the enormous responsibility I had inherited. There were moments when I almost wished she hadn't given it to me, because it felt like too much to carry, so I left it there, hidden away, while I focused on everything else I needed to do. Victoria felt a surge of empathy for the Queen. The pressure of royal life, especially during a period of transition, was immense. She could understand how even something as significant as the coronation gown could get pushed aside in the face of more immediate demands. Your Majesty, I need to tell you that we've had the gown examined by our chief textile conservator, Victoria said carefully. It's definitely the original, and it's in relatively good condition despite the storage situation. However, it does need proper conservation care now. Of course, Queen Camilla agreed. I should have dealt with this sooner. I take full responsibility for not handling it properly. There's also the matter of the replica at Windsor, Victoria continued. Currently, anyone who sees it believes they're looking at the real coronation gown. We need to decide how to handle this situation going forward. Queen Camilla considered this carefully. What are our options? Victoria had prepared for this question. We could return the original to the royal collection and remove the replica, explaining the situation to the necessary parties. Or we could keep the original here with you as Queen Elizabeth intended, but ensure it's properly stored and conserved. The replica could remain at Windsor for display purposes, with a select few people knowing the truth. What do you recommend? The Queen asked. I think we should honor Queen Elizabeth's wishes, Victoria said. She wanted you to have the original gown as a private symbol of continuity. We can have it moved to a proper conservation facility here at Clarence House with climate control and security. The replica can remain at Windsor for public viewing. The truth can be documented in private royal records without becoming a public story. Queen Camilla looked relieved. That seems right. Elizabeth was so thoughtful about this gift, and I've done it a disservice by neglecting it. Let's make sure it's properly cared for going forward. I'll make the arrangements immediately, Victoria assured her. We'll need to involve a small team of trusted people, the conservators, security, and the keeper of the royal collection. But we can keep the circle very small and ensure complete discretion. Thank you, Victoria, Queen Camilla said warmly. Thank you for handling this with such sensitivity, and please convey my thanks to the security guard and housekeeper who found the gown. They showed good judgment in bringing it to your attention. As Victoria left the sitting room, she felt a profound sense of relief. The mystery had been solved, and it had a touching explanation behind it. Queen Elizabeth's final gift to Queen Camilla had been found, and would now be properly honored and preserved. But as Victoria began making calls to arrange for the gown's conservation, she reflected on the human side of royal life. Behind all the ceremony and tradition were real people dealing with grief, responsibility, and the challenge of living up to enormous expectations. Sometimes even queens needed time to process gifts and gestures, especially ones as weighted with meaning as a coronation gown. The story would remain private, known only to a handful of people who understood the need for discretion. The public would never know that the coronation gown they might see on display was a replica, or that the original now rested in Queen Camilla's care as a symbol of trust between two women who had both served the British monarchy with dedication and grace. In the end, that seemed entirely appropriate. Some stories didn't need to be public to be meaningful. Some gifts were precious precisely because they were private, understood only by those directly involved in their giving and receiving. 3 weeks had passed since the discovery of Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown in Queen Camilla's closet, and Clarence House had settled back into its normal rhythm. But for those few people who knew the truth, nothing felt quite the same as it had before that Tuesday morning. James Mitchell stood at his usual post in the upper corridor, performing his security duties as he had done for 15 years. But now, when he walked past Queen Camilla's chambers, he couldn't help but think about what they had found and the remarkable story behind it. He had been personally thanked by the Queen herself, a quiet moment in the hallway where she had shaken his hand and told him that his discretion and professionalism were deeply appreciated. Sarah, the housekeeper, had reacted similarly. She went about her daily tasks with the same efficiency as always, but there was a new understanding in her eyes when she cleaned the Queen's rooms. She had been part of something significant, a small piece of royal history that would never be publicly known, but would always matter to her. The coronation gown itself now resided in a specially prepared conservation room on the ground floor of Clarence House. Margaret Sullivan had designed the space herself, with precise temperature and humidity controls, filtered air circulation, and specialized lighting that wouldn't damage the delicate fabrics. The gown hung on a custom-made support structure that distributed its weight evenly, preventing any strain on the 70-year-old silk. Margaret visited the gown twice a week, monitoring its condition and performing gentle conservation work where needed. She had become its guardian, treating it with a reverence that went beyond professional duty. She understood that she was caring for a piece of living history, a garment that had witnessed one of the most important moments in 20th century British life. Victoria Chen had compiled a complete confidential report about the entire incident, documenting every step from the initial discovery to the resolution. The report was sealed in the royal archives, accessible only to the monarch and a handful of senior household officials. Future historians might one day read it and understand what had happened, but for now, it remained a closely guarded secret. Edward Thornbury, the keeper of the royal collection, had quietly updated the records at Windsor, The replica coronation gown was now properly documented as such, though the public records still listed it simply as the coronation gown, without specifying that it was a reproduction. The few people who had access to the full records understood the truth, and they had all signed non-disclosure agreements that would remain in effect for 50 years. On a Thursday afternoon, Victoria received an unexpected summons to Queen Camilla's private sitting room. When she arrived, she found the Queen looking through a leather-bound photo album, one that Victoria recognized as containing personal photographs from Queen Elizabeth's life. "Victoria, come sit with me," Queen Camilla said, patting the seat beside her on the sofa. Victoria joined her, and the Queen turned the album so they could both see the page she had been viewing. It was a photograph from the coronation day itself, showing a young Queen Elizabeth wearing the magnificent gown that now resided one floor below them. She looked radiant and serious, the weight of her new role evident in her posture even as she smiled for the camera. "I've been thinking about Elizabeth a great deal these past weeks," Queen Camilla said softly, "about what she meant by giving me this gown and why she felt it was important." "What have you concluded, if I may ask?" Victoria inquired gently. "I think she was telling me in her own way that the role of queen is both a burden and a gift. That gown represents duty, yes, but it also represents hope, continuity, and the enduring nature of the institution we serve. She wore it when she was just 27 years old, younger than you are now, Victoria, and she carried its significance with her for 70 years. Queen Camilla turned another page, showing more photographs from the coronation ceremony. "She wanted me to understand that I didn't have to be her, that I could carry forward in my own way, but that the weight of tradition and responsibility would always be there, beautiful and heavy at the same time." "I think you understand her message perfectly, Your Majesty," Victoria said. "I hope so," Queen Camilla replied. "I've decided that once a year on the anniversary of her coronation, I want to visit the conservation room and spend time with the gown, not as a maudlin exercise in grief, but as a reminder of what she entrusted to me and what I've committed to uphold." Victoria thought this was a beautiful gesture. "I'll make sure the room is prepared whenever you wish to visit." The Queen closed the photo album and set it aside. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. I'm having a small private room, created in the family wing, a place for personal reflection. I want to include some of Elizabeth's belongings there, things she gave me over the years that have special meaning. The coronation gown will remain in the conservation room where it's properly cared for, but I want a photograph of it displayed in this reflection room, alongside other mementos." "That sounds like a meaningful tribute," Victoria agreed. "It will be private, just for family and very close friends who understand the significance," Queen Camilla explained. "Elizabeth lived so much of her life in public, performing her duty with such grace. This will be a space where her memory can be honored privately, personally." Over the following months, the reflection room took shape. It was a small, peaceful space with comfortable seating, soft lighting, and walls lined with photographs and personal items. The framed photograph of the coronation gown held a place of honor, and beneath it a small plaque read simply, "Given in trust, received with gratitude." James and Sarah occasionally saw Queen Camilla entering or leaving this room, often with other members of the royal family. Prince William visited once with Queen Catherine, and they spent nearly an hour inside. The staff understood that something important happened in that space, even if they didn't know all the details. The replica coronation gown at Windsor continued to be displayed to the public, and thousands of visitors admired it each year, never knowing they were viewing a reproduction, but in a way that seemed fitting. The public saw what they expected to see, a beautiful gown that represented royal history and tradition. The deeper truth, the story of Queen Elizabeth's private gift and Queen Camilla's initial uncertainty about how to honor it, remained known only to those few who needed to understand. One evening, several months after the discovery, Victoria was working late in her office when she received an email from Margaret Sullivan. The conservator wanted to share that she had just completed a detailed conservation report on the coronation gown, and its condition was now stable and excellent. With proper care, the gown would last for centuries, a testament to the skill of its original makers and the dedication of its current caretakers. Victoria smiled as she read the email. In a world that often seemed chaotic and changeable, there was something deeply satisfying about knowing that this piece of history was being preserved with such care. The story of its discovery had transformed from a moment of confusion and concern into something much richer, a tale of royal relationships, trust, and the passing of responsibility from one generation to another. As Victoria closed her laptop and prepared to go home, she reflected on the unexpected turns that life in royal service could take. She had started that Tuesday morning expecting a normal day of routine tasks and minor crises. Instead, she had become part of a story that revealed the human side of the monarchy, the private gestures and personal connections that existed behind the public pageantry. James Mitchell, making his final rounds of the evening, paused briefly outside the conservation room on the ground floor. He couldn't see inside. The door was secure, and the room windowless for protection, but he knew what was there. The memory of that moment when he and Sarah first opened the garment bag would stay with him forever. The shock of recognition followed by the realization that they had found something extraordinary. In the years to come, all of them would occasionally remember that day and smile quietly to themselves. They had been part of something special, a secret chapter in royal history that connected two queens across the boundary of death. A story of trust, duty, and the enduring power of thoughtful gifts. The coronation gown rested in its climate-controlled sanctuary, the silk and embroidery as magnificent as they had been 70 years earlier, waiting patiently for the next time Queen Camilla would visit to honor the woman who had worn it first, and had chosen to pass it forward with love and confidence. And in the royal archives, sealed away for future generations, Victoria's report told the complete story, ensuring that someday, when enough time had passed and the sensitivities had faded, historians would know the truth about the day a royal guard stumbled upon Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown in an unexpected place, and how that discovery led to a deeper understanding of the bonds between those who serve the crown, both in public and in the private moments that mattered just as much.